Hendrix Kane was 38 years old, and he had exactly one belief he never questioned. A quiet man can still change the world. He just doesn't need anyone watching while he does it. He had built Kane Global from a salvaged dream and his late father's sacrifice. $50 billion in energy, logistics, and technology. And yet, on a Tuesday morning in late September, inside the kitchen of his River Oaks home, the woman who had stood before God and their families and made a promise was leaning against the granite counter, touching up her lipstick, and speaking into her phone as if the words were meant for the drain. Today, you're going to meet a real man. She wasn't speaking to Hendrix. She was speaking to Tyler Grant. Hendrix heard every word. He didn't flinch. He didn't slam a cabinet. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened a folder he had named, without ceremony, Timeline. 8 months of evidence. He had discovered the affair 8 months ago, the way these things usually begin, not with a confession, but with an accident. A voice note Hannah had recorded for Tyler, sent to the wrong contact. Hendrix had listened to it once, set his phone down on the kitchen counter, and made a decision that most people would never have made. He decided to wait. Not because he was uncertain, but because he understood, from watching his father navigate a company crisis that nearly destroyed everything, that a partial truth, acted on too early, allows everyone involved to scatter. He needed to know whether Tyler had been accessing sensitive company information, whether Hannah had been quietly moving their assets, whether the Harper family had been aware and complicit. He needed them all in the same room. So for 8 months, he had watched, collected, and organized every receipt, call log, hotel record, and financial discrepancy into a folder so complete there would be no gaps for anyone to slip through. Tonight, that moment was arriving, on schedule. He picked up his suit jacket, charcoal, minimalist, no logo, and fastened his father's watch onto his wrist. Elias Kane had given him that watch on Hendrix's 30th birthday, 2 months before the cancer took him. A man who had spent the last year of his life signing company documents from a hospital bed with an IV in his arm because he believed Kane Global was worth handing to his son. Hendrix wore that watch every single day. His phone buzzed. He answered quietly. "Hey, Mama." Dorothy Kane's voice came through from Beaumont, warm and steady. "Whatever you do tonight," she said, "remember to stay calm." "Yes, ma'am," he said. He hung up, buttoned his jacket, walked back to the kitchen doorway. Hannah was still at the mirror, adjusting her earrings, the light catching her face the way she knew it would. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful. That was never the question. Hendrix looked at her for a long moment. His eyes didn't harden into anger. They went somewhere quieter, to a place that looked, from the outside, a great deal like grief. The slow kind that settles in over months without announcing itself. "Ready to go?" he said. She glanced at him in the mirror. "Almost. Don't embarrass me tonight. My family will be there." He nodded once. "I'll be perfectly fine." Outside, the tail end of Houston's summer still pressed down on River Oaks, late September warmth that doesn't surrender until well past midnight. Hendrix held the car door open. Hannah got in without looking at him. He sat behind the wheel. Before starting the engine, he pressed 2 fingers to the face of his father's watch. "Stay calm." The drive to the Harper home in Memorial took 20 minutes on Westheimer. Hannah smiled at her phone the entire way. Those small, private smiles she used to give him, a long time ago, in a different version of this life. Hendrix drove in silence and thought about timing. Tonight was not the confrontation. Tonight was the last piece of evidence he needed. He simply had to see how far they were willing to go. In public, in front of family, before he gave them the answer they had been walking toward for nearly a year. As the car turned onto the quiet street where the Harper house sat behind a row of well-trimmed magnolias, Hendricks drew one slow breath and let it out. He had known everything for 8 months. The only thing he hadn't anticipated was how much it would still cost him to sit at that table and watch. Keep listening, because what happens the moment they walk through that front door is something Hendricks had prepared for. But not every wound, it turns out, can be prepared for. The Harper house on Crestwood Drive in Memorial announced itself the way certain families do, not with warmth, but with deliberate display. 2 stories of red brick and white columns, a fountain running in the circle driveway that Hendricks had never once seen turned off. The kind of house that says, "We arrived. Did you?" Hannah checked her compact mirror before they reached the door. She hadn't spoken to Hendricks since they left River Oaks. Evelyn Harper opened the door before they could knock. Silver hair perfectly set, cream blazer, and the expression of a woman who had scripted the evening and was simply waiting for the players to arrive. She pulled Hannah into a long embrace, then turned to Hendricks. "Hendricks." One nod, the kind you give a repairman who showed up on time. Evelyn. "Beautiful home, as always." Inside, Harold Harper stood near the wet bar, 65, former director of a small bank in Katy, a credential he surfaced at regular intervals regardless of context. He glanced up when Hendricks came in. "Still at that consulting firm?" No real curiosity behind it. "Something like that," Hendricks said pleasantly. Harold made a small sound and turned back to his drink. What was unfolding in that room had a name: relational diminishment, reducing a person through accumulated small gestures. A name said without warmth, a question asked without interest, a seat at the far end of the table. None of it dramatic enough to confront, all of it deliberate enough to feel. The Harper family had been doing this to Hendricks for years. What made it possible was confirmation bias anchored through a trusted source.
When someone we love tells us who a person is, we stop looking for other information. We simply confirm the verdict already handed to us. Hannah had been narrating Hendricks's story to this family for a long time, and they had accepted her version without ever checking the original.
Kellen Harper was already at the dinner table, 37, leaning back with the ease of a man who considers himself the authority in any room. He grinned when Hendricks came in. The quiet man himself. "Kellen," Hendricks shook his hand. "Hannah told Mom back in the spring she was tired of waiting for you to finally succeed. Said there's only so long a woman can be patient." He let that sit on the table, like a dish nobody ordered. Evelyn cleared her throat from the kitchen. Harold took a slow sip. Hendricks looked at Kellen with the stillness of a man who has nothing to prove. He picked up his water glass, took a measured sip, set it down without a sound. He did not respond. Some rooms don't deserve your best sentences. His place setting was at the far end of the table, near the wall. He sat there without comment. Then the front door opened. Tyler Grant walked in like a man who had rehearsed this entrance. Tailored navy suit, gold watch catching the chandelier light, a ribbon-wrapped gift box under one arm, the kind of packaging that announces its own price. He was laughing at his phone before he cleared the threshold. "There she is," he said, looking straight at Hannah. And Hannah smiled back at him, the way a woman smiles at someone she has already chosen. Openly, without apology, as though Hendricks were furniture. Tyler shook Harold's hand, hugged Evelyn a beat too long, then dropped into the chair beside Hannah, Hendricks's original seat, with the ease of a man who believes he is the obvious upgrade. "I was telling my contact at Woodway Energy," he said, reaching for the breadbasket, "that the Gulf Coast logistics contract I'm signing next week opens up everything down here. Real money. My name on it." He tapped the table twice. "That's how you build a legacy." Harold raised his glass. What Tyler was performing is called status signaling through narrative projection. He wasn't sharing news. He was constructing a character and presenting it to this family as a contrast to the one at the far end of the table. The gold watch, the gift, the name-dropped contract. Each detail was an argument he was making without stating it directly. Compare me to him. I win. And it was working. Harold's raised glass, Evelyn's softened expression, Kellen's quiet nod. They were not evaluating Tyler. They were confirming a conclusion Hannah had placed in their hands months ago. The most dangerous person in any negotiation is not the loudest voice. It is the one who already knows the outcome and is simply watching the others catch up. Hendricks turned one thought over quietly. The Gulf Coast contract Tyler is bragging about was pulled from the pipeline 3 days ago. It no longer exists. He just doesn't know it yet. Then Hannah stood up. She walked around the table and placed her hand on Tyler's shoulder. For just a fraction of a second, so brief no one else would have caught it, her eyes found Hendricks's across the room. Something passed across her face that wasn't triumph. Something older and less certain. It was gone before it could be named. Then she leaned down and kissed Tyler on the cheek. Deliberately. In front of her parents, her brother, the white linens, and her husband of 6 years. She straightened and looked directly at Hendricks. Do you feel small now? Clear. Calm. The voice of a woman who had been saving that sentence for a long time. The table went still. Hendricks looked at his wife for a long, unhurried moment, long enough that Tyler shifted in his chair, long enough that Kellen set down his glass. Then Hendricks folded his napkin and spoke in a voice with no anger in it, only the settled weight of a man who has stopped waiting on anyone else's schedule. No, he said, I just feel disappointed. He stood, thanked Evelyn for dinner, nodded to Harold, did not look at Tyler. He walked to the front door and, before pulling it closed, said quietly to no one in particular, she didn't just choose someone else. She brought him here to make sure I knew it. The door clicked shut. Outside, a light wind moved through the magnolias. Hendricks sat in his car in the dark without starting the engine. Then he picked up his phone. Tomorrow morning at 7, he told Jasmine. Invite Tyler Grant to the executive dining room. Tell him the CEO wants to discuss a significant opportunity. Don't use my name. A pause. And send a message tonight to Hannah's family, all of them. The CEO of Kane Global has requested their presence for a major investment discussion. Tomorrow at 2:45, same building. Understood, Mr. Kane. He set the phone down. Through the windshield, the Harper fountain was still running. It was always running. He wanted them in the same room, his room, because the truth deserved the same audience as the humiliation. Not to punish, to close the door with the kind of finality that cannot be argued with. He started the car and drove home through the dark. The quietest person at that table was the only one who knew exactly what came next. Real power rarely announces itself over dinner. It shows up the following morning, at 7 a.m., 34 floors up, with a view of the entire city. Hannah kissed her lover at the dinner table, right in front of her husband of 6 years. Type 1 if Hendricks should have walked out right then and never looked back. Type 2 if what he did the next morning was the most powerful move of his life. Or tell us, have you ever stayed quiet in a room where you already knew the truth? Drop your story below. Stay with us, because Tyler Grant is about to walk into a meeting he thinks is a promotion. He has no idea who is sitting at the head of that table. The executive dining room on the 34th floor of 811 Main Street was not designed to intimidate. It didn't need to be. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Houston skyline. A long mahogany table 12 chairs, always polished. A single painting on the east wall, navy and gold, made by a Third Ward artist for the company's 15th anniversary. No trophies, no framed headlines. Just the table, the city, and the silence that only exists 34 floors above the noise. Hendricks arrived at 6:45 and sat at the head of the table facing the door. He hadn't turned on the overhead lights. Just the early morning silver through the glass, the pale, composed light of a city not yet fully awake. Coffee he'd made himself. A single folder. His phone face down. He loosened his cuffs and waited. At 7:03, the elevator opened at the end of the corridor. He heard Tyler before he saw him, that particular footfall of a man who expects to be received, not examined. The stride of someone who has already decided he is the most important person in the room. The glass door swung open. Tyler stepped in, sharp gray suit, gold watch catching the morning light, already carrying the beginning of a smile. He saw Hendricks. The smile didn't fall all at once. It went in stages, the way a building loses power floor by floor. First the eyes, then the mouth, then the shoulders, dropping a fraction of an inch as though something had quietly become heavier. His hand, still on the door handle, tightened before he let go. "Mr. Kane," his voice recalibrated mid-word, too bright, slightly compressed.
"I didn't realize. I thought the meeting was with..."
"The CEO," Hendricks said. "It is." He gestured to the chair across the table. Tyler walked the rest of the way in and chose a seat 2 positions further than the one set for him, as though distance offered some margin of safety. It didn't. What Tyler experienced in that doorway has a name: identity threat under confrontation. For months he had been operating inside a carefully constructed story, that he was the capable one, the ascending one, while Hendricks was merely background. That story had been built with Hannah's words, confirmed by the Harpers' approval, and performed confidently at their dinner table less than 15 hours before. In the span of 4 seconds, the architecture of that story cracked. This is the particular cost of self-deception. It doesn't protect you from the truth. It only delays the collision, and guarantees that when it arrives, it carries the full accumulated weight of everything you refused to examine. Hendricks opened the folder. He let the silence expand before looking up. "Tyler, on April 3rd of this year, you submitted a reimbursement claim for $31,000, categorized as client entertainment. Our finance team completed a full audit last week. $11,000 was legitimate. The remaining $20,000 was personal. 2 hotel stays in San Antonio, a jewelry purchase on Post Oak Boulevard, and a deposit on a vacation rental in Galveston for the 4th of July. He looked up directly. "The jewelry, a Thursday in April. That same evening, my wife wore a bracelet I had never seen to dinner with her colleagues. I noticed. I said nothing." He closed the folder. "I rarely say anything immediately. I prefer to be certain." Tyler's jaw moved. Nothing came out. "She told you I was controlling," Hendricks said. His voice stayed even, not cold, but temperature-controlled, adjusted without announcement. "That I was hiding money. That the marriage was over in everything but paperwork. She believed those things because she had spent 6 years measuring our life against a standard she never shared with me, and using your attention as proof she'd been right to feel shortchanged. I can explain. The personal matter is being addressed through legal channels. What we're here to discuss is the professional dimension of your choices." He pressed the panel button. The screen on the north wall came on. A documented timeline. Photographs, itemized receipts, call logs from the company's internal monitoring system, Tyler's own voice, discussing the Gulf Coast contract he planned to claim publicly, discussing Hannah, discussing Hendrix in terms with no place in any professional environment. The room went very quiet. Tyler stared at the screen. His hands found the edge of the table and pressed flat. The way a person presses down when they need to confirm something solid is still there. Behavioral economists call this dual loss shock, losing not just a position, but the identity built around it. Tyler had not simply worked at Kane Global. He had used this company as evidence in a private argument, proof that he was more capable, more worthy, more real than the man whose name was on the building. Watching that argument dissolve on a boardroom screen, in front of the man he had spent months dismissing, that is not merely a professional setback. It is a structural collapse of self. The gold watch that had felt like a statement at dinner now felt like something very different. "The Gulf Coast contract you announced last evening," Hendrix said, "was withdrawn from the pipeline 3 days ago. The filing is complete. There is no contract. There never will be." Tyler pressed harder against the table. "I promoted you," Hendrix said. His voice did not rise. "You came here as a field coordinator, entry level. I believed you had potential and moved you into regional management. I doubled your compensation. I gave you access to rooms and partnerships you had not yet earned. You used that access to misappropriate company funds, to conduct an affair with my wife, and to sit at her family's table and mock the man who had opened every door you were standing behind." "Please," Tyler's voice broke. "I have people depending on me. I'll pay back everything, just—" "Your termination is effective today. Benefits end at close of business. Legal will send the grounds for dismissal and the recovery schedule by end of week." He stood, picked up his folder, straightened his jacket, walked to the glass door, paused, did not turn around. "Tyler," his hand rested on the door frame, "I didn't promote you because of who you were. I'm promoting you because of who I thought you were becoming." A brief pause. "That distinction matters." He walked out. The door closed without a sound. Humiliation that finds you in private is more instructive than any public spectacle. Hendrix gave Tyler one morning to watch his story dismantle. Quietly, professionally, completely. No crowd, no theater, just the truth on a mahogany table with the Houston skyline as its only witness. The most devastating corrections are never the loudest. They are simply the ones that are undeniably true. Tyler Grant left without his badge, without the contract, and without the story he had been telling himself for months. But Hendrix wasn't finished. A second meeting was already on its way up the elevator, and it was bringing the entire Harper family with it. At 2:45 that afternoon, a black town car pulled up to the entrance of 811 Main Street. Jasmine watched from the lobby through the glass. She had sent the invitation herself, worded precisely as Hendrix had instructed. The CEO of Kane Global requests the presence of the Harper family and their associated guest for a discussion regarding a significant investment opportunity. 2:45 p.m. Executive Dining Room, 34th floor. Dress appropriately. No name included, on purpose. Evelyn Harper stepped out of the car first. Cream blazer, silver earrings, the composed posture of a woman who had been waiting her entire life for exactly this kind of invitation. She smoothed her jacket before the car had fully stopped moving. Harold followed, chin up, already reading the building's glass facade with the appraising eye of a man who had once managed other people's money and never quite stopped auditioning for a larger stage. Kellen came next in a blazer a shade too shiny for a Tuesday afternoon. And then Hannah, in a fitted green dress and heels, carrying the quiet brightness of someone who believes the day is about to confirm everything she has decided about herself. She had done her hair. Jasmine greeted them in the marble lobby and walked them to the elevator. Not one member of that family asked whose name belonged to the invitation. Not one of them thought to. That detail, the fact that not one of them asked, is not a small thing. It is, in many ways, the most revealing moment in the entire story.
Psychologists call this motivated inference, the tendency to reach the conclusion we most want to reach, and then work backward to build the justification for it. The Harper family had spent years wanting Hendricks to be a certain kind of man, limited, overlooked, easily replaceable. So they had made him that man in their minds, in their dinner conversations, in the chair at the far end of the table. And when this invitation arrived with no name attached, each of them quietly filled in the blank with the version that confirmed everything they already believed. They were not walking into a meeting. They were walking into the consequence of a verdict they had delivered without ever examining the evidence. The elevator opened on the 34th floor. Jasmine walked them down the corridor and opened the glass door of the executive dining room. The room held the full weight of an October afternoon. Long gold light crossing the mahogany table. The Houston skyline spread beyond the windows in the unhurried, vast way of a city that has never needed to explain itself. It was the kind of view that reminded you, without apology, how large a world can be when you have never been asked to see it from the top. And at the head of that table, in a charcoal suit with his father's worn watch on his wrist and his hands folded in front of him, was Hendricks Kane. On the wall behind him, the north-facing screen was dark. The table was set for a meeting. Water glasses, legal pads, the quiet formality of a room that conducts serious business. Beside each seat, a folder bearing the Kane Global letterhead. Evelyn saw him first. She blinked once. Her eyes moved across the room. 2 Kane Global security officers standing quietly near the east wall. The formal arrangement of the table. The folders. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Harold stopped mid-step. Kellen made a sound that was not quite a word. Hannah's hand found the back of the nearest chair. Hendricks let the silence hold for a moment, just long enough for the room to rearrange itself in each of their minds. For the investment meeting they had imagined to dissolve, and for what was actually happening to take its place. Then he stood, slowly, fully, the way his father had taught him to stand when something important needed to be said, not for effect, but for clarity. "Welcome to Kane Global," he said. "I appreciate you making the drive from Memorial. Please, come in." No one moved toward the chairs. "I understand the invitation didn't include a name," he said. "Allow me to correct that. My name is Hendricks Kane. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Kane Global. Energy, logistics, and technology operations across 14 states and 4 international markets. Our current asset valuation is approximately $50 billion. He paused, without theater. "This is my building. That is my table. And the CEO you came here to meet today is me." What Hendricks did in that moment was not a performance of power. It was a correction. Clear, documented, undeniable. To a story the Harper family had been living inside of for years, without ever questioning its accuracy. The psychological term for what each of them experienced is schema collapse, the involuntary breakdown of a mental framework that has organized someone's understanding of another person. The brain resists this actively. It feels disorienting in a physical way, which explains why Evelyn's hand reached for Harold's arm before she consciously decided to reach, why Kellen couldn't finish a sentence, why Hannah's fingers tightened on the back of a chair, as though the floor had shifted beneath her. They were not simply surprised. They were losing the architecture of an assumption they had never thought to question. And that is a far more unsettling experience than ordinary surprise. He pressed the panel button. The large screen on the north wall turned on.
9 faces appeared in a video conference grid. The Kane Global Board of Directors, joining remotely from Houston, New York, and Chicago. Present as witnesses to a formal company disclosure. Evelyn scanned the faces on the screen with the instinctive social radar of a woman who has attended decades of functions and never forgotten a face that mattered. Third from the left, bottom row. Gray temples, dark tie. The steady, patient expression of a man who has sat in 1,000 serious rooms and knows precisely which ones require his full attention. She recognized him. Gerald Morrow had been a name Harold invoked at dinner parties for the better part of 20 years. A classmate from his banking days who had, in Harold's telling, really made something of himself. The kind of name people reference with the particular warmth of someone who wants credit for knowing a person without necessarily having stayed close to them. Gerald Morrow was on the board of Kane Global. The implication settled over Evelyn like cold water. The man Harold had spent 2 decades holding up as an example of real success, while dismissing the quiet man who sat at the far end of their daughter's dinner table, had been on the board of that quiet man's company the entire time. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Harold, that's Gerald Morrow." Harold stared at the screen. Something shifted in his face. Not shame exactly, but the particular discomfort of a man who realizes, all at once, that the story he has been telling about himself was never as private as he imagined. Hendricks continued. His tone did not waver. "For the record, this meeting serves as formal notification that Kane Global has completed termination proceedings for Tyler Grant, former Regional Operations Manager, effective this morning, on grounds of financial misconduct and conduct incompatible with company standards. Documentation has been filed. The board has been informed." The folders at each seat contained a summary of the termination, receipts, call logs, a documented timeline. Not to humiliate, to be factual, to ensure that what had happened existed on paper, in the permanent record, and could not later be revised by anyone's memory or preference. "Additionally," Hendricks said, "I retained family law counsel 2 weeks ago and initiated divorce proceedings earlier this week. All parties have been formally notified through their respective legal representatives." The room was very quiet. Then Hannah moved. She came toward him from across the table, and something had shifted in her face in a way that could not be manufactured or recalled on cue. The composure she had been wearing for months, the certainty, the forward-leaning confidence that her family's approval had always given her, it had come undone. What was underneath was rawer and younger and more frightened than anything she had allowed herself to show at last night's dinner table. She reached him. She took his hand between both of hers. Her hands were shaking. And then, in front of the board of directors and the security officers and her mother and father and her brother and the documented record of her choices displayed in the folder in front of every empty chair, she went to her knees. The tears were not the composed kind, not the kind you produce for an audience. These came from somewhere deeper than strategy, the kind that surface when the version of yourself you have been performing collapses all at once, and you can no longer remember who you were before you started the performance. "Please," she said, "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please, not like this. Not in front of everyone." Hendricks looked down at her. He did not look away. He let himself see her clearly, without the armor of certainty she had built around herself over 2 years of planning and choosing and justifying. He thought about who she had been when he first loved her. The woman who had grabbed his hand in the dark of a movie theater and leaned her head against his shoulder and said, simply, "I choose you." He thought about how long ago that was. He thought about everything that had been built in the years between that moment and this floor. And then, gently, without anger, without theater, without cruelty, he removed his hand from hers. "I know you mean that," he said quietly. "But meaning it now doesn't change what you chose then. He straightened, nodded once toward the board's camera. The screen went dark. He picked up his folder, buttoned his jacket, walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, did not look back. "Jasmine will see you out," he said. "Drive safely." The door closed behind him. In the silence after he left, with the October afternoon light still crossing that long mahogany table, something became permanently true for everyone remaining in that room. They had never been evaluating Hendrix Kane. They had been evaluating their own idea of him, a version constructed from second-hand accounts, shaped by their own preferences and blind spots and the particular comfort of feeling superior to someone. They had mistaken his silence for emptiness, his patience for passivity, his restraint for the absence of anything worth restraining. And here is what this story makes impossible to deny. The person you underestimate has not changed when you finally see them clearly. They were always that person. The only thing that changed was your willingness to look. Hendrix rode the elevator down alone. For the first time in 8 months, his shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, but in release. But the story is not finished, because what he chooses to do in the quiet weeks that follow is not revenge. It is something slower, more deliberate, and far more lasting than that. He walked out of that building and did not look back. But the story wasn't over, because 3 weeks later, a message arrived, and what Hendrix chose to do with it would be the most deliberate decision he made in the entire 8 months. That evening, Hendrix returned to his penthouse on River Oaks Boulevard. He had moved here 3 weeks before the confrontations, quietly, before any of it became visible. Jasmine had arranged the lease. His mother had mailed a small potted rosemary plant from Beaumont in a tissue-lined box with a handwritten note. Rosemary for remembrance, but also for new beginnings. He had set it on the kitchen windowsill without overthinking it. The apartment was spare and clean, good light, a leather chair near the east window looking out over the treetops. A kitchen stocked slowly over 3 weeks. The kind of groceries that mean a man has made a quiet decision to be okay. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door, stood at the kitchen window for a moment. For the first time in 8 months, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something. His phone vibrated. Mama. "Hey, Mama." Dorothy Kane's voice came through warm and unhurried. The voice of a woman who had been praying every night for 3 weeks and was ready to hear it was finally all right to stop. "My son, tell me." "It's done," he said. She exhaled, long and full, releasing everything she'd held through months of careful check-in calls and late-night texts that simply read, "I'm praying for you." "Good," she said softly. "Your daddy would be proud of how you carried yourself." Hendrix looked at the watch on his wrist. "I hope so," he said. "He didn't need to see you destroy anyone," Dorothy said. "He just needed to know that no one destroyed you." They talked a few minutes longer, her neighbor's dog still raiding the garden, the peach cobbler for the church bazaar, the grandchildren's recital next month that he absolutely had to mark on his calendar right now. He laughed, genuinely, the kind that surfaces only when a person finally feels safe enough to let it through. After they hung up, he stood in the kitchen, in the particular silence of a room that now belonged only to him. Not a sad silence, an honest one. An honest silence, he was discovering, is its own kind of company. 3 weeks passed. Houston, in mid-October, has a quality summer rarely allows. The heat stepping back, the light going gold in the afternoons. Hendrix had started waking early again, running the trails at Memorial Park before the city fully woke. He was cooking on Sundays, calling his mother every evening at 7. He was sleeping well. He hadn't expected that. After months of lying awake beside a woman whose absence had moved in ahead of her, he hadn't expected silence to feel like recovery. But night by night, it did. He was at the kitchen counter on a Wednesday evening when his phone lit up with an unknown number. He opened the message. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Can we talk?" No name. He knew. He set the phone down and looked at the rosemary plant on the windowsill, which was, he noticed for the first time, growing. He hadn't done anything particular. He'd placed it in good light and not neglected it. Apparently for Rosemary, that was enough. He thought about what those 12 words had cost Hannah to send. The armor she always wore, the forward-leaning certainty, the performance of a woman ascending. She had set all of it down and pressed send. He understood what that cost. But being moved was not the same as going back. He walked to his home office, sat at his computer, and opened a draft that had been sitting in his outbox for 2 weeks. He had written it carefully, reread it 4 times, waited until he was certain. The email was addressed to 7 senior energy partners in Houston, 2 Gulf Coast logistics networks, and 3 private equity contacts who managed workforce placement for infrastructure projects. Subject line: Professional Reference Update. Tyler Grant. 3 sentences. Tyler's departure from Kane Global, the professional grounds for that departure, and 1 final line. As a result of the above, Tyler Grant is not recommended for placement within Houston's energy sector at this time. This notice is sent as a professional courtesy to relevant partners. He pressed send. Closed the laptop. That email was not revenge. Hendricks had not been operating from anger for some time. What he acted from was clearer and more durable than that. Protecting his professional network from documented misconduct was not cruelty. It was maintenance. A proportional consequence communicated through appropriate channels without embellishment. And deleting Hannah's message without a reply, no final speech, no confrontation, was its own form of dignity. He did not need her to understand. He did not need anything from her at all. Psychologists studying post-betrayal recovery return to this consistently. The healthiest closure is rarely the dramatic confrontation we imagine in our pain. It is the quiet internal moment when we realize we no longer need the other person's remorse to move forward. When we discover that our peace does not depend on their regret. That moment, standing in a kitchen with a cup of coffee and a growing rosemary plant, is what real closure looks like. Not loud, not triumphant, just complete. He went back to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, looked at the rosemary on the sill in the October evening light, opened Hannah's message one last time, read it once more, deleted it, turned off his phone, set it face down on the counter, stood in the kitchen light, in the honest silence of a room that was entirely his, and breathed. We're almost at the end, but the most important part is still ahead, because what Hendricks finds on the other side of all of this may be the truest thing this story has to offer. 4 months after the morning Hannah whispered, "Today, you're going to meet a real man," into her phone, in a kitchen that no longer held his coffee cup, Hendricks Kane stood at the penthouse window and looked out at the lights of Houston spread below him like a low, wide field of stars. He was not thinking about Hannah. He was thinking about his father, about Elias Kane, who had sat up in a hospital bed at Memorial Hermann and said, in a voice already made thin by illness, but still completely his own, "A man's worth is not in what he displays, son. It is in what he protects. Protect your peace. That is the real inheritance." Hendricks had protected it. Not easily, not without cost. There had been mornings when he sat in the parking garage of the Kane Global building for 10 minutes before he could make himself get out of the car. There had been evenings when grief arrived without asking. At odd hours, in the middle of ordinary things, indifferent to dignity. He had not acted from that grief. He had let it move through him the way weather moves, and waited for the morning after. The mornings after had come, all of them. Now he stood at the window with no role to perform and no audience to manage. A glass of water, his father's watch on his wrist. The view of a city Elias Kane had believed in enough to give everything he owned for. He was not gloating. That word didn't apply. What was there instead was something simpler and more permanent. He felt complete. Not triumphant, not relieved. Complete, the way a long sentence feels when it finally finds its period. We live in a culture that has romanticized revenge. We want the speech, the public reckoning, the moment when the person who wronged us is brought low in full view. And there is something human in that desire, something honest. But research on post-betrayal recovery consistently shows people who invest their energy in dismantling the one who hurt them almost always find the result smaller than expected and themselves exhausted in the getting there. The people who invest that same energy in rebuilding, in protecting their peace, in returning to the work and relationships and mornings that make life worth living, find that the justice they wanted arrived on its own, without their management. Not because the universe runs on a tidy moral schedule, but because the choices we make tend to travel with us, into every room we enter. Every relationship we attempt, every mirror we look into. Hendrix Kane did not deliver the consequences, he simply declined to prevent them. There is a difference, and it is the difference between revenge and peace. On a clear Saturday morning in late October, Hendrix drove to Beaumont and brought his mother back to Houston for the day. They had brunch at a restaurant on West Alabama that Dorothy had clipped from a magazine 6 months ago and kept beside her prayer list, waiting for the right occasion. It was exactly what she hoped. Good food, good light, a booth by the window, no reason to hurry. They walked through Herman Park afterward, slowly, her hand in the crook of his arm. The October light came through the live oaks at a low angle that made everything look like something worth holding on to. Dorothy talked. About Elias mostly. She told him about the year his father had tried to grow tomatoes on the fire escape of their first apartment and failed at every stage with remarkable consistency. About the way Elias sang off-key to the radio while he cooked, full volume, completely committed, reliably wrong about the melody. And about the night before Hendrix was born, when Elias had driven to 3 different stores at 2 in the morning because Dorothy had mentioned once, in passing, that she missed a particular brand of decaf coffee. Because he was paying attention, she said. That was your daddy. He was always paying attention. Hendrix laughed, the kind that sounds like something being slowly restored. On the drive back to Beaumont, Dorothy fell asleep in the passenger seat. The particular sleep of a woman who trusts completely where she is and who is driving. Hendrix drove through the late afternoon light without the radio, just the road, his mother breathing beside him. He thought about the rosemary plant on the windowsill, growing in the light without being asked to. He thought, I can do that. I can do exactly that. He drove. This story teaches us something that no greeting card will ever say plainly enough. The people who truly saw you, who noticed when you were tired before you said a word, who saved the last piece of pie for you without being asked, who drove to 3 stores at 2 in the morning because you mentioned once that you missed a particular coffee. Those people were the whole inheritance. Not the house, not the savings account, not the china in the cabinet you're still afraid to use. If you are living alone now in a house full of their things, here is something small and real to try. This week, take out one ordinary object that belonged to them, a coffee mug, a worn cardigan, a handwritten grocery list you never threw away. Set it somewhere you'll see it at breakfast. Not to grieve, to remember that being truly known by another person, even for a season, even imperfectly, is the rarest thing a life can hold. Then, The next time your grandchild calls and says they're bored, ask them to come over. Teach them one recipe you haven't made since. Let them measure wrong. Let the kitchen get loud. Because the antidote to being overlooked is not proving your worth to anyone. It is returning, quietly, on a Tuesday, with flour on the counter, to the people who never needed convincing. Human writers poured their soul into these scripts to expose injustice and celebrate humanity. AI served as a technical supporter, refining expression so the valuable messages of equality, humility, and hope could reach and inspire millions. Production team: Story and Screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.